The death zone above 8,000 meters gives climbers no margin for mistakes. Here, a lost trail or a broken partnership isn't just a setback. It can mean an irrecoverable slide toward death, as seen in the most horrible fates ever recorded on Everest. Yasuko Namba vanished just 300 meters from shelter when a blizzard erased her return path, while others like Joshua Kirui or Daniel Paul Patterson were separated from safety by almost undetectable errors, sometimes just a failed compass bearing or a moment's hesitation. But what does it actually mean to be lost high on Everest, when the difference between life and death can be measured in steps? The precise human cost of those final decisions is more chilling than most people realize. Here's how 5 climbers crossed a line they could never return from. Above 8,000 meters on Everest, the human body is pushed to its absolute limits. Here, the air pressure drops to 1/3 of what it is at sea level. Even the fittest climbers, breathing as deeply as they can, take in only a fraction of the oxygen their bodies need. Without supplemental oxygen, blood oxygen saturation, measured as SpO2, often falls below 70%. At these levels, clear thinking becomes nearly impossible. Decision-making slows by as much as 40%. Simple tasks, like unclipping a carabiner or following a faint trail, can take twice as long or go fatally wrong. The term death zone is not a metaphor. At this altitude, the brain and muscles starve for oxygen, and the body begins to break down. Hypoxia clouds judgment and dulls the sense of direction. Even small mistakes, misreading a landmark, losing sight of a partner, hesitating at a junction, can become unrecoverable. Hypothermia sets in quickly, as temperatures often fall below -30 degrees Celsius and wind speeds top 100 kilometers per hour. In these conditions, exposed skin freezes in minutes and fine motor skills vanish. The death zone also strips away time. Climbers have only hours before their strength fades. Movement slows, and the mind drifts into a fog. Above 8,000 meters, there is no margin for error. The invisible thread that ties a climber to shelter, to safety, can snap in an instant. The science is unforgiving. At this altitude, losing the route or failing to keep moving is rarely survivable. Yasuko Namba's story begins long before the storm. At 47, she had already climbed 6 of the 7 summits, driven by a quiet resolve that surprised even her teammates. Expedition logs described her as twice her weight in determination. Her ambition was clear: to become the oldest woman to stand on Everest's summit. On May 10, 1996, that goal was finally within reach. The push for the top started before dawn, but the mountain was crowded. Dozens of climbers queued at the fixed ropes below the Hillary step, waiting for their turn to pass. Each delay ate away at the precious hours of daylight and safety. Namba pressed on, her focus narrowing with every step. By the time she reached the summit, it was already 2:30 p.m., well past the recommended turnaround time. Photographs from the top show her holding a small Japanese flag, her face etched with exhaustion and relief. But the summit is only halfway. The late hour put Namba and many others in a race against the coming darkness. As she began her descent, the wind started to rise. Visibility dropped as the first gusts swept across the south corner. Behind her, the trail was already vanishing. The fixed ropes that had guided the way up were now buried under fresh snow. In those moments, the distinction between progress and peril blurred. Namba's drive had carried her to the highest point on Earth, but the mountain would soon erase every sign of the path home. Night on the South Cowell buried all hope of a clear path. The blizzard did not just hide the route, it erased it. Wind-driven snow filled every footprint, swallowed every marker, and left Yasuko Namba and those near her in a world without direction. At these altitudes, a distance of 300 meters, less than 2 city blocks, becomes an impossible gulf when the line to camp disappears. Shelter was so close that, as dawn broke, the tents of Camp 4 flickered in and out of view through the shifting white. But the storm had drawn an invisible wall between safety and exposure. Namba huddled with Beck Weathers and a handful of others, battered by winds that cut through down suits and dropped the temperature to -40 degrees Celsius. No one could move. The cold locked joints and dulled the mind. Hypoxia stripped away the last reserves of strength. Every attempt to stand or crawl toward the camp ended in collapse. In the words of survivor Mike Groom, dark attempts were futile. By 7:30 in the morning, a search party led by John Krakauer and Stuart Hutchison reached the group. Namba was alive but unresponsive, her face caked in ice, her breathing shallow. The team chipped frozen snow from her mouth and nose, but she could not speak or move. The decision to leave her behind was not made lightly. At this altitude, even the rescuers were barely functioning, their own lives balanced on the edge. The mountain had severed the thread that ties a climber to shelter, not by distance, but by making the simple act of moving forward impossible. Joshua Cheruwayo Kirui grew up running the hills of Kenya's Rift Valley, where altitude was a part of daily life, and endurance was measured in hours, not minutes. By his late 30s, he had already climbed Mount Kenya more than 20 times and completed a 15-hour speed ascent of Kilimanjaro, a feat that left even seasoned guides shaking their heads. But Everest was different. Kirui's goal was clear: to become the first African to reach the summit without supplemental oxygen, not just to climb Everest, but to do it the hardest way possible. His training was relentless. In 2023, he had already reached the top of Manaslu, another 8,000-meter giant without bottled oxygen, a first for any African climber. Friends described him as quietly obsessive, methodical, and fiercely proud of his heritage. The challenge of Everest without oxygen was not a stunt but a statement that an African body, conditioned by years of thin air and hard ground, could stand on the world's highest peak without artificial aid. In the months leading up to the climb, Kirui documented his preparation, endurance runs at dawn, altitude drills, and long, silent hours on technical routes. Videos show him moving with a steady, deliberate pace, never rushing, always conserving energy. He spoke often of the invisible thread that connects a climber to the mountain and the need to respect every step. For Kirui, the summit was not just a destination, but a test of self-reliance and trust in his own limits. The drive that brought him to Everest was deeply personal, rooted in ambition, but also in a belief that the mountain could be met on its own terms, without shortcuts or second chances. The final approach to Everest's summit is a lesson in margins. Above the Hillary Step, the ridge narrows to just 2 meters wide, a strip of snow and rock suspended between worlds. On one side, the Kongshung face drops away for 3,000 meters. On the other, the southwest face tumbles toward the western comb. Here, the difference between safety and oblivion is measured in footsteps. Climbers must keep to a line barely wider than a doorway, trusting their instincts as much as their eyes. But at 8,800 meters, the senses betray. Wind gusts hammer the ridge at 95 kilometers per hour, sculpting cornices that overhang the abyss. These fragile shelves can collapse beneath a misplaced step, sending a climber out of sight in seconds. The safe route is not marked by ropes or flags, but by memory and feel. In clear weather, the path is obvious, a faint groove where boots have passed before. When the wind rises, snow swallows every trace. A climber who drifts just 1 meter off the safe line may find themselves on unstable ground, the ice beneath their feet no longer anchored to the mountain. At minus 38 degrees Celsius, the body's response time slows. Gloves stiffen, faces numb, and even unclipping from a fixed rope becomes a struggle. Every decision on the ridge is a test of spatial awareness. Small deviations, often just the width of a stride, have separated survivors from those who vanish. In these moments, geography is not a backdrop, but an active threat. The knife-edge ridge demands absolute fidelity to the route. Any lapse, any hesitation can erase the line between the living and the lost. At 8,831 meters, the body's final defenses fail. Joshua Cheruwayo Kirui stepped into this zone with no bottled oxygen, trusting only his own acclimatization and the practiced rhythm of his breath. The ridge here is a thin line, sometimes no wider than a boot, drawn between the summit and a drop of more than 3,000 meters. Each step requires perfect fidelity to the route. The margin for error is measured in centimeters, not meters. On May 22, 2024, Kirui and his Sherpa guide, Nawang, moved above the Hillary Step. The last known coordinates placed Kirui just 19 meters below the summit. In that altitude, SpO2 levels without supplemental oxygen can fall below 55%. The mind begins to slip, even as the body keeps moving. Judgment fragments, visual cues blur, GPS drift, even by a meter, can place a climber on unstable snow or an overhanging cornice. The difference between the safe line and the fatal one is invisible to eyes clouded by hypoxia. Radio contact broke near Bishop Rock. Nawang reported Kirui's refusal to turn back, noting abnormal behavior, classic signs of severe oxygen deprivation. Then, silence. The partnership, which should have anchored Kirui to the route, was lost. Whether the separation was a matter of minutes or moments, it left him alone in the most exposed section of the mountain. No one witnessed the slip. Kirui's body was found days later, wedged in a crevasse just below the summit ridge. Nawang was missing, swallowed by the same terrain. On Everest, being lost is not always a matter of wandering off course. Sometimes, it is a split-second drift, one footstep, one breath, when the mountain claims the line between presence and disappearance. Daniel Paul Patterson's path to Everest was built on years of steady climbs and calculated choices. Born in the United Kingdom, he had spent over a decade moving through the world's highest ranges, building a reputation for patience and technical skill. Reports from previous expeditions mention his calm under pressure, a preference for double-checking anchors, and a willingness to turn back when conditions soured. His summit log from Manaslu describes the mountain as a place for humility, not bravado. Yet Everest was always the goal, a challenge that demanded both ambition and respect for the mountain's dangers. His partner, Tenji Sherpa, brought a different kind of experience. Raised in the Khumbu Valley, he had reached Everest's summit 5 times before 2024. His name was well known among the Sherpa community, not just for his climbing record, but for his reputation as a careful, attentive guide. Friends described him as steady and unflappable, someone who could read the mountain's moods by the shape of the clouds and the sound of the wind. Tenji's lineage tied him to generations of Sherpas who had worked these slopes long before Everest became a global stage. Together, Patterson and Tenji formed a partnership built on mutual trust and a shared sense of responsibility. Their dynamic reflected the best of the modern Everest expedition, the union of Western ambition and Sherpa expertise, each relying on the other's strengths to navigate the mountain's hazards. They had climbed together before, learning each other's rhythms and limits. On Everest, that bond would be tested in the narrowest of margins, where a single misstep could send both men into the void. In the days leading up to their summit push, teammates observed their quiet confidence, a sense that whatever happened, they would face it together. But on the knife edge above the Hillary Step, even the strongest partnership can be severed in an instant. On Everest's uppermost ridge, the margin between security and oblivion narrows to the width of a single boot print. The summit corridor above the Hillary Step is defined not by clear markers, but by memory, instinct, and the invisible weight of every step. Since the collapse of the Hillary Step in 2015, the terrain has shifted. What was once a fixed vertical obstacle is now a slanted, broken band of rock and snow, with the safe line drifting unpredictably each season. Anchors and fixed ropes, once set with confidence, now rely on snowpack that can shift with a single storm. Every year, the cornice, a fragile shelf of wind-packed snow, creeps outward, concealing a void. In places, only a 3-meter gap separates the true ridge from a fatal drop. A climber who drifts laterally, even by the width of a stride, can step from solid ground onto a cornice that will not hold. In these moments, the mountain offers no warning. The collapse is instantaneous. There is no time to shout for help or to grab a rope. The body vanishes, swallowed by the Kongshung face, a sheer fall of more than 2,500 meters. The loss is not gradual or uncertain. It is final, and in most cases, unseen by anyone else. Forensic analysis of recent incidents points to this mechanism. Teams studying the ridge after 2015 have mapped the anchor points and noted how crowding, shifting snow, and even a momentary loss of concentration can nudge a climber onto unstable ground. The difference between presence and absence is measured in centimeters. On Everest, to be lost is often not to wander, but to drift, sideways, imperceptibly, until the mountain removes all trace. Confirmation arrived from the Chinese side of Everest. Daniel Paul Patterson and past Tenji Sherpa had vanished over the ridge, their bodies located at 9,050 meters on the Kangshung face. The report was brief and final: coordinates, altitude, and a note that retrieval was impossible. The east wall of Everest, swept by avalanches and lined with crevasses, offers no path for rescue teams, no safe landing for helicopters, and no hope of return. For families and teammates on the Nepal side, the news closed every remaining door. The mountain had not only claimed 2 lives, but placed them beyond the reach of tradition, ceremony, or recovery. In the days that followed, teams on both sides pieced together the sequence. Patterson and past Tenji were last seen near the summit ridge, moving in tandem through a crowded corridor where a misstep could mean a fall of more than 3,000 meters. Witnesses described a moment when both men were visible, then gone. No cries, no sign of a fall, only the sudden absence that signals a cornice collapse or slip onto the wrong face. The Chinese authorities logged the location at 9,050 meters, a point nearly level with the summit, but on the far side of the world from base camp. There would be no retrieval. Above 8,000 meters, the calculus of rescue is unyielding. Even the strongest Sherpa teams cannot survive long enough to search the Kangshung face, and the risk to additional lives is considered unacceptable. The official record stands: 2 climbers lost, their final position confirmed but unreachable. On Everest, to be lost is sometimes to be placed forever on the other side of the mountain, present in the record, absent from the world below. Szilard Suhajda approached Everest with a philosophy shaped by decades on the hardest faces of the ALPS. He was known among European climbers for quiet discipline, a preference for light packs and minimal support, and a belief that true success in the mountains came from self-reliance. The north faces of the Eiger, Matterhorn, and Grandes Jorassis had taught him to trust his own judgment, to move alone when the route demanded it, and to accept that in the highest places, help is often an illusion. In the months before his Everest attempt, Suhajda wrote in his journal about the purity of solo climbing, how every decision, every step belonged to him alone. "The ridge calls," he wrote, "and I must answer on my own terms." This ethic shaped his approach to Everest in 2023. Unlike most climbers, Suhajda chose to go without supplemental oxygen and without a Sherpa partner above Camp 4. He carried only what he could manage himself: a small pack, a radio, and his own resolve. Friends and supporters followed his progress through brief check-ins and satellite messages, but he made it clear, if he lost contact, there would be no one to call for help. For Suhajda, the summit was not just a goal, but a test of the alpine values he had carried up so many other peaks. On the upper slopes, this determination became both his strength and his vulnerability. The death zone rewards self-sufficiency, but it also punishes isolation. Above 8,500 meters, small errors compound quickly. A missed radio call, a wrong turn in the dark, or a moment of confusion can erase the line between presence and disappearance. Suhajda's last journal entry, written at Camp 4, captured the paradox of his climb. To be alone here is to know the mountain as it truly is, beautiful, indifferent, and final. Between 8,750 and 8,848 meters on Everest, the summit corridor becomes a place where disappearance is not a matter of distance, but of minutes and millimeters. The wind here scours the ridge at speeds that can erase a line of footprints in less than 10 minutes. What begins as a visible trail, boot prints pressed into the snow, a faint groove where dozens have passed, can be swept away by a single gust. Snowdrifts build and collapse with no warning, filling depressions and smoothing over every sign of passage. Even fixed ropes, when not buried outright, can vanish beneath a skin of wind-packed snow, leaving only memory to guide a climber forward. The terrain itself conspires against certainty. Micro features, small rises, hidden dips, the subtle tilt of the ridge change shape with each storm. A cornice may extend a meter farther than it did the day before, masking the true edge of the mountain. The safe route, sometimes no wider than a single footstep, can shift laterally with the snowpack. At this altitude, judgment is already compromised. The difference between solid ground and a void is not always visible, even in daylight. Search efforts in this band face a unique futility. Within hours, any trace of a missing climber is absorbed. The snow that fills their tracks also buries dropped gear, clothing, or even bodies, especially if a fall carries them into a hidden crevasse or over the edge. Rescue teams, fighting their own hypoxia, often find only a blank, unmarked surface where a person was last seen. On Everest's uppermost ridge, the mountain does not just hide its secrets, it erases them, leaving behind a corridor where the lost are claimed by silence and snow. Search teams assembled at first light, each group assigned a narrow band of the summit corridor. Radios crackled with coordinates, but the instructions were simple. Move slow, check every depression, call out names into the wind. In the death zone, even the act of searching is an ordeal. Every step above 8,700 meters drains the body, and every minute spent exposed pushes rescuers closer to collapse. The grid search for Sealard Suhajda began within hours of his last sighting. Teams from 3 expeditions fanned out between the Hillary Steppe and the summit, retracing the narrow route where he was last seen. GPS units marked progress, but the terrain refused to cooperate. Overnight, gusts had swept the ridge clean, erasing tracks, equipment, and any sign that a climber had passed at all. Logbooks from May 25th record methodical sweeps, teams moving in parallel, eyes scanning for a glove, a flash of color, any sign that the mountain had not already claimed everything. Radar and thermal devices, brought up in hopes of detecting a body beneath the snow, returned nothing but static. Not a single trace surfaced. No dropped gear, no footprints, no movement under the drifts. The searchers, themselves fighting hypoxia and frostbite, were forced to accept what the mountain had made clear. Above the Hillary Steppe, the ridge absorbs everything. Loss. On Everest is not always marked by discovery. Sometimes it is measured only by silence and by the blank entries in the search logs that follow. Subrata Ghosh's approach to Everest was defined by discipline and a quiet sense of purpose. Born in Kolkata, he built his reputation in the Indian climbing community through a decade of Himalayan ascents, each one harder, each one demanding more from his body and mind. In 2025, Ghosh set out to become the first Indian climber to reach Everest summit without supplemental oxygen. His preparation was methodical. Training logs from the winter before his climb show, daily runs at dawn, hours spent on treadmill incline intervals, and repeated ascents of lesser peaks with a weighted pack. Teammates remember his focus on acclimatization, sleeping in hypoxic tents, monitoring his blood oxygen with fingertip sensors, and logging every minor symptom of altitude sickness in a battered notebook. By May 15, the summit was within reach. Ghosh moved steadily above Camp B4, his Sherpa partner beside him, both moving in the slow, mechanical rhythm that the death zone demands. The final meters to the top are never a sprint. Each step is measured, each breath a conscious act. At 8,849 meters, Ghosh stood on the highest point on Earth, fulfilling a dream carried for years. There was no celebration, only a brief exchange with his Sherpa and a photograph against the wind. The descent began without delay. But not far below the Hillary Steppe, something changed. Ghosh's pace faltered. He stopped, then refused to continue. The Sherpa urged him on, but Ghosh's speech slurred, his gaze unfocused. Reports from the expedition detail how he insisted he could not move, even as the wind picked up and the temperature dropped. The body, already battered by hours at extreme altitude, began to surrender. In the thin air, high-altitude cerebral edema can arrive without warning, first confusion, then collapse. For Ghosh, the summit was not the end of the journey, but the point where forward momentum finally failed. On Everest, stopping is not a pause. It is the moment when the mountain takes everything. High above the Hillary Step, the body's last systems begin to fail in ways that are both sudden and irreversible. At these altitudes, oxygen saturation in the blood, SpO2, can collapse below 60% within minutes. The brain, starved of oxygen, swells against the skull. This is high-altitude cerebral edema, or HACE. Its onset is rarely dramatic. First, the climber's speech slurs, vision narrows, thoughts scatter. The sense of direction, already fragile, vanishes completely. A person may insist they are fine, or that they can see the route. Even as they drift from the safe line, the body fights to keep moving, but the signals grow tangled. Muscles lose their response to commands. A climber may stop to rest, only to find that standing up again is impossible. The cold deepens the crisis, slowing the heart, thickening the blood. Fingers and toes stiffen, then go numb. At this point, the difference between a brief pause and total collapse is measured in seconds. When SpO2 falls below 60%, the brain enters a survival state. Judgment is lost, memory loops, and the urge to lie down becomes overwhelming. The environment accelerates the decline. Wind strips away body heat faster than the blood can supply it. Even with the summit in sight, the mind and body disconnect. The clock, once measured in hours, now ticks down in minutes. In the death zone, when the body stops, the mountain finishes what hypoxia began. There is no recovery from this cascade. The only certainty is that movement must not cease, because at this altitude, stopping is the same as surrendering to Everest itself. 5 climbers, 5 ways to vanish above 8,000 meters. Each story is different, but the outcome is the same. The invisible thread that ties a person to safety is cut, sometimes within sight of shelter, sometimes by a single step, sometimes by the body's own collapse. The science is clear. Above the death zone, even the smallest deviation or delay can become final. The patterns are impossible to ignore. Storms erase the route, as with Yasuko Namba. A climber drifts from the safe line on the summit ridge, as with Joshua Kirui, where the difference between life and death is measured in footsteps. Partnership can fail in an instant, as it did for Daniel Paul Patterson and Tenji Sherpa, who vanished together over the Kangshung face. Communication breaks down, as with Suhajda, leaving a solo climber untraceable in a corridor just meters wide. And sometimes, as with Cerebral, the body simply stops moving and there is no way back. These are not accidents of fate. They are the predictable results of altitude, exposure, and the limits of human endurance. In response, the debate over mandatory oxygen above 8,000 meters has grown louder. Some argue for strict rules. No solo climbs above the high camps, no summit pushes after midday, and traffic caps on the most dangerous sections. Others point to the risks of crowding and the pressure it puts on both climbers and guides. Proposals for GPS tracking, double Sherpa teams, and even AI weather prediction are on the table, but the mountain remains indifferent. Every year, new policies are considered, but the fundamental lesson is unchanged. On Everest, being lost is not always about distance. It is about the moment when forward movement fails, when the thread to safety is broken, and nothing remains but the mountain and the thin, silent air. Each year, Everest draws more climbers, yet the line between safe return and irretrievable loss grows thinner above 8,000 meters. GPS markers and fixed ropes offer no guarantee when a single step or missed sign severs the lifeline. The mountain does not forgive uncertainty. In the death zone, clarity is survival. For those who follow, the true cost of being lost here is measured in moments, not miles. What would you risk to find your way?